Hi, everyone. We're seeing people coming in to the webinar right now. Welcome. We'll just wait for a couple more minutes for people to come in, and then we'll take you through the research phase of the double materiality assessment.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Is that correct? Can you hear me? Perfect. Welcome in the second webinar of our CSRD series. The first one was about CSRD and double materiality as a whole. Now we're going to do a deep dive into the media analysis and the stakeholder engagement. Can you share your screen?
Yeah. I'll share it now.
So we're going to do the research phase of the double materiality. The first one was about, as I said, double materiality and the recording. We can provide you with the recording after this meeting. We will also provide you with this recording. My name is Lawrence. I'm Sustainability Solutions Manager at Coolset. Next to me is my colleague Jasper. He's a sustainability researcher, and he will guide you through stakeholder engagement and media analysis today. So an agenda plan for the day. So quick guide to what is double materiality and what is a double materiality assessment. Quick guide to the ESRS topics and the objectives of the research phase. Then we have a deep dive in the matter of today, the stakeholder engagement with a case study, and the media analysis with a case study, and then how you can integrate your findings into the double materiality assessment. After that, the conclusion of the matters today, and I will provide you with some solutions to get you going. The floor is yours, Jasper.
Thank you, Lawrence. So I think most of us joining today have heard of double materiality before, but just to give everyone a small recap, a small starter on what it is. double materiality is essentially a way for companies to map their relationship with the environment and stakeholders. So your company, you're situated within a very complex network of stakeholders, of nature, of people that want something and you're producing. So how do you relate to these things? That essentially is double materiality. It has two layers, as the name already gives away. The first dimension is looking out, which is impact materiality. And here we look at, for example, pollution, human rights, gender equality. So how does your company affect these things? Then you have the other dimension, which is looking in, and this is called financial materiality. And here your company looks at, for example, regulatory changes, droughts, public perception. So here the question really is, how do these things affect your company's financial viability in the short term, the medium term, and the long term? So that is one element, but how do you go from the double materiality as a general concept to the double materiality assessment? That is what I'll explain here quickly. So double materiality assessment is part of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD for short. And I think most of us here have also heard of CSRD, but also just a small recap. CSRD is the newest climate legislation rolled out by the European Union and will make it mandatory for over almost 50,000 companies next year to report on various ESG metrics. And this is the biggest climate reporting requirement rolled out to date. So it's a really exciting period, but also quite stressful for companies as they navigate this new reporting landscape. And of course, at Coolset, we're here to help you get through this. And also, this is why we've hosted this webinar, because we've seen a lot of questions from our customers come up on these questions regarding double materiality and how to dive into the research phase. So more about that in a second. So the double materiality assessment is the first step of annual sustainability reporting. And it is a selection methodology for the 10 ESRS topics. There's 5 environmental, 4 social, and 1 governance. So it really encompasses this ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance. And I'll explain in a second more about these 10 topics and how the double materiality assessment helps to establish which ones you need to use for reporting. Just a quote here from the EFRAG. The EFRAG is the organization responsible for rolling out the policies on ESRS and double materiality. So what they say goes. And I just wanted to quickly share this with you. The ESRS do not mandate a specific process or sequence of steps to follow when performing the materiality assessment. And so this is left to the judgment of the undertaker. I wanted to share this quote with you because it really shows that there's quite a lot of flexibility within the double materiality assessment. It's not set in stone. I think that's also why some of us have joined today, because there are some question marks, but hopefully towards the end of the webinar, we've answered several of those specifically relating to the research phase. There are a lot of things to make sense of, though, a lot of things to guide you through the double materiality assessment. There are some key elements, and they mainly revolve around impacts, risks, and opportunities. IROs, they're also called, and these are a recurring theme throughout the double materiality assessment. Just a small explanation. Impacts are basically the metrics used for impact materiality, whereas risks and opportunities are the metrics used for financial materiality. So it really is this breakdown into these various layers, with impacts, risk, and opportunities used kind of as a collective description of how to approach these issues. So then a quick run through of the ESRS topics. As I mentioned, there's 10 overarching ESRS topics. These are also called sustainability matters. And within these 10 topics, there are 37 subtopics. So that means that every topic has subtopics, and then some subtopics have 72 subtopics. So it's quite a mouthful, and it's also can be quite confusing. And I've just drafted a small example. For example, if you look at S1 on workforce, this has one subtopic which is called working conditions, and this subtopic in turn has 8 subtopics, of which 2 are working time and work-life balance. So of course, this is not an exhaustive example. It just goes to show that there's a lot of dimensions that you need to take care of before you really understand the whole concept of the ESRS. So within that, we have the IROs, which have to be broken down into these individual levels. So that's always important to consider that when you do the double materiality assessment, when you conduct or when you go through the ESRS requirements, it's important to also break it down into these subtopics, but also the subtopics. And also note that ESRS E1, which is climate change, is almost always material. What that means is that for all the ESRS topics, basically you need to determine which are material based on the double materiality assessment, and it's a binary. So either something is material or something is not material. And if something is not material, that's completely acceptable as long as you argue what the thresholds were. However, for E1 climate change, if you determine that this is not material, you will have to explain this with quite some context, because under the EFRAG's ESRS, this is a really essential topic and usually requires reporting and is usually material. So just some context on that. Also a quick overview of the cross-cutting standards. We have ESRS 1, which is the general requirements, and ESRS 2, which are general disclosures. And these always have to be reported on regardless of the double materiality assessment. What I like to think of them as, the explanatory section of the ESRS, whereas the topical standards are really specific about what is your company actually doing, how do you report on them, whereas the general disclosures, for example, really asks questions about the methodology and the framework that you've employed and the process in itself. So this is more a deep dive into the process of double materiality, whereas double materiality in itself is quite a practical process. So let's move into the objectives of the research phase. So under the EFRAG's most recent documents, there's 3 steps to the double materiality assessment, and step A is called understanding the context. This essentially also is the research phase. This phase helps companies make a selection of relevant IROs, and it supports ESRS 2, IRO 1, which is called Description of the Processes to Identify and Assess Material Impacts, Risks, and Opportunities. So this stage is really all about finding these IROs and also establishing a sound methodology for finding these IROs through good research. So I'll explain that in this webinar. So how to do that research? It does so by putting your company in a context, and it does that mainly through stakeholder engagement and the media analysis. And also the purpose of this is so that the auditor will need to see the foundations of your materiality arguments. So ultimately, you need to set a threshold for what is material, and these thresholds are somewhat subjective. We'll not go into details on thresholds in this webinar. If you want to know more about that, you can ask us for the webinar recording we did previously, but we also have a guide on double materiality assessment that we will share with you towards the end of this webinar, where you can learn more about thresholds. But anyhow, you need to be able to argue what the thresholds are and how you came to the conclusion that certain topics are material while others are not. And in arguing for this materiality, the research phase is essential. So you need to argue that stakeholders have a certain opinion about certain relevant topics, and the media analysis might also have a very important impact on how you consider certain topics. So a quick example, if you have ESRS S1, which is on workforce, and you say that this is material, this will likely require proof from employees by, for example, sending out surveys and collecting their data and integrating it into the final report. So without further ado, let's have a look at stakeholder engagement. So stakeholder engagement is de facto mandatory. Why de facto? Because while the EFRAG doesn't mandate it, the auditor most likely will. As I just mentioned, the auditor will look at your reasoning for establishing materiality, and stakeholder engagement is an issue, is a topic that is frequently discussed within the official documentation on double materiality assessments, and will require an elaborate process for you to successfully engage all the relevant stakeholders. Also, ESRS 2, SBM 2 requires input on stakeholder engagement specifically. So here you really explain the approach that you took to engaging stakeholders. And here's another quote from the EFRAG that I thought would be relevant for everyone watching today, which states that the ESRS require disclosure on the assessment and its outcomes, but do not mandate specific behavior on stakeholder engagement or the due diligence process. So here again, we see that the EFRAG, while they do give a very clear direction that they want companies to head in, they do not give a very hard requirement on how to do the stakeholder engagement process. And this is, this can be good, but also can be quite frustrating because sometimes you just want to have clear guidance, but it does allow you to really kind of take a unique approach or a customized approach to how you engage stakeholders. Generally, there's two types of stakeholders. You have the internal and the external stakeholder. The internal stakeholder is mainly related to employees, while the external stakeholder can be anything from investors to suppliers to consumers. And just a quick example of, for example, what internal stakeholders could be used for, this would be ESRS S1 on workforce, or ESRS S2 workers in the value chain. And for external stakeholders, this might be ESRS S3 affected communities. So of course, this list isn't exhaustive, but it just gives you an indication of how you could approach various stakeholders. And good to note is that also you don't need to have a standard questionnaire or a standard list of interview questions. It really is customizable to every stakeholder and should definitely not be used as a blanket, a document that you send out to all the stakeholders that you include in your double materiality assessment. So that also brings me to the stakeholder engagement process. So how do you actually go from theorizing stakeholder engagement to integrating it into your double materiality assessment? So it's important to make a short list first of sustainability matters. These are these ESRS subtopics that I discussed, as well as the subtopics and entity-specific topics. Once again, we're not diving into entity-specific topics in this webinar. For that, please reach out to us. We'll be glad to send you some supporting documentation. So once you have the short list of sustainability matters, we map out which stakeholders to reach out to and how. So this means, for example, sending surveys for employees and interviews for suppliers. And this basically you do for all these subtopics and entity-specific topics, and you look which stakeholders are relevant. Also good to note is you do not need to engage stakeholders for every materiality issue. It is more of a question on is it relevant to include stakeholders here or is it not? So it's also a question to the sustainability team in charge of this process. So then you prepare the surveys, interviews, and workshops, and you ideally sync your questions to the sustainability matters. So if you have a survey, for example, for employees, and you decide to look at S1 on workforce, it's good to sync these questions to this ESRS topic, while of course making the questions digestible for employees, so not drowning them in lingo that they might not be able to understand in the context of ESRS. We focus at Coolset mainly on surveys and interviews, and also offer context for workshops. But it's good to note that in the conversations that I've had with experts in this field, and also for future auditors, the main approach is surveys and interviews for stakeholder engagement, and workshops, for example, roundtables on other issues. So then we look at conducting the engagement activities. So once you have prepared all these topics and you have prepared the surveys and the interviews, you start conducting the engagement activities. That means you do the surveys, you send out the interviews, you conduct them, and once you have all that done, you analyze the output, which means connecting it to the shortlisted IROs. And once you've done that, you report on the process for subsequent years, which you do under ESRS 2, SBM 2, as I just discussed. So just a quick case study of stakeholder engagement to make this a bit more clear. So say we have a company called Acme International, and it imports clothes from China and Vietnam and brands them in the Netherlands. So for the sake of this example, I've shortlisted topics rather than subtopics, just to give you a quick overview of how this could be done. So I've shortlisted E1 climate change, E5 resource use and circular economy, S1 on workforce, S2 works in the value chain, and S4 consumers and end users. So once you've shortlisted, you go and reach out to stakeholders, for which I've made this table. So this is also what your table could look like once you start conducting this process. And here on the left, we see the name of the stakeholder, which basically can be anything from an NGO to an employee to a supplier or a consumer. And we see here also the group level or the individual level, and what kind of stakeholder they are. And what I've done here is I've connected it to a certain ESRS topic. As I mentioned previously, it's important to connect to various topics and not be very general about which stakeholder is connected to which topic, because also they, of course, have a field of expertise, and it would be a waste of their resources and yours to have conversations about things that they're not knowledgeable about. So it's important to connect them to certain ESRS topics, as I've done here. And then under the EFRAG guidelines, it's also mandatory to determine whether they are affected stakeholders or whether they are users of your sustainability statement. Your sustainability statement being the sustainability report that you publish once a year. And then, of course, towards the end, you can also mention which engagement method you've chosen. And here we see interviews and surveys. And once again, interviews allow you to go more in depth. The more qualitative allow you to ask follow-up questions. So that's really a valuable tool, but it's also more time consuming and restricts you to a small number of people that you can interview. Whereas surveys have the benefit that you can send them out to a lot of people at the same time. And ask a certain amount of questions. So, for example, interviews could be more relevant for suppliers or NGOs, whereas surveys might be more relevant for consumers, but also employees, that you can send out surveys for all employees that work at your company, for example. Some practicalities of stakeholder engagement. It's important to prioritize stakeholders. So, for example, you can map stakeholders based on their influence over your organization, because once again, it's not essential to engage all the stakeholders that you can think of, merely the ones that you think have added value to the double materiality assessment. So here also really prioritize the stakeholders based on their influence on your organization. Rule of thumb, but allow up to 8 weeks for responses. This can, of course, be different for your company specifically, and also give the option to retract opinions. And this is maybe more relevant for companies or respondents that maybe have to deal with less freedom of speech, such as the example where we have this NGO based in Vietnam, where freedom of speech is quite limited. You definitely have to include the option to retract opinions. And then last but not least, it's good practice to share your company's sustainability statement with engaged stakeholders once published. So please keep track of who you've interviewed, who you've surveyed, so that they can also then get an overview of your sustainability report and see how their answers are reflected in this report. Then moving on to the media analysis. So the media analysis basically helps you going through various media sources and can help establish the importance of different IROs, and helps to identify emerging trends and risks. Small side note, in general, the media analysis is quite broad and is also not as well described in the official documentation as stakeholder engagement. What the EFRAG does mention is, for example, some examples, which are media reports, analysis of peers, existing sector-specific benchmarks, other publications on general sustainability trends, and scientific articles. So this is what the EFRAG posted, and this also kind of gives you the range of things to research when conducting the media analysis. I'll explain in a second how to do that specifically. Also interesting is for the media analysis, you can engage the silent stakeholder, which is nature. Why is it silent? Because it cannot speak for itself. So you need to assess how your impact on nature is, and you can do this by conducting scientific research. You can also, of course, do this with stakeholder engagement by, for example, interviewing nature-based NGOs. But as a rule, media analysis also works very well for this stakeholder. So some tools and techniques. Very general. Google is your best friend in this. Basically, you just need to be quite savvy with the internet, doing research, conducting the media analysis is quite broad. So you can look at both scientific reports, such as here I mentioned Google Scholar, but you can also refer to scientific or news articles and competitor reports, and it can go quite broad. Another a last quote, I think, from the EFRAG, a source to consult for impact materiality is the scientific research, in particular for environmental matters where credible scientific reports and other sources may be key to objectively assess the severity and or likelihood of impacts. So here, what's interesting in this quote is that they put an emphasis on scientific research, and they also put this in the context specifically of environmental matters. So for this environmental pillar of ESG, so these 5 topics, it's really important to conduct scientific research to assess your company's impact on these topics. So let's do a quick case study. So we have the same company, Acme International, and it has the shortlisted ESRS topics that I mentioned previously. And then it conducts weeks of online research, specifically focusing on environmental topics. And based on this, the following articles are found. So what I've mentioned before is that we focus on these environmental topics. So that's what I've done here as well. So we look at ESRS E1 climate change. So to reiterate, Acme International is a company that imports textiles. So we look at, for example, the first article is quite broad, considering supply chain management in view of climate change and overview of possible impacts on the road ahead. So this really gives you a top-down perspective on supply chains and how they're changing. So this might give you some relevant insights. Then we go more specific. So we look at an overview of the contribution of the textile sector to climate change. So here we look specifically already at the textile sector and how this is affecting climate change. So these might give you relevant insights that you can use to identify, for example, negative actual impacts or negative potential impacts. And then the second, I'll also mention a positive impact. And then here we see another article, which is called Assessment of Carbon Footprint for the Textile Sector in France. Why France? The company that we're looking at is based in the Netherlands, but it's important here to also look at peers and countries that are close to yours. So what I want to reiterate here is that you don't need to restrict yourself to a small number of data points or sources. You can also look abroad and see if there are some takeaways or data points that you can apply to your own company. So oftentimes, especially starting out, you won't have a very good overview, and it's fine to go a bit broader and look at, for example, in this case, France as an example. And then we look at ESRS E5, resource use and circular economy. So the first article that I've decided to highlight here is a systematic review of the life cycle inventory of clothing. So this is more of an LCA type of thing. So where you really look at the specific emissions of clothing and how can you make it more sustainable. Then we look at bulk industrial production of sustainable cellulosic printing fabric using agricultural waste to reduce the impact of climate change. Now, this is a potential positive impact. So within these impacts, you have various characteristics, which we also share in the double materiality assessment guide that we'll share with you afterwards. And one of these characteristics is this potential positive impact. And this could be one article that could contribute to a positive impact that your company can have on the printing industry. And then an article rather than a scientific paper, because these are also quite important, which is titled The Impact of Textile Production and Waste on the Environment. So how to integrate research findings into the double materiality assessment. So once you've completed the stakeholder analysis and the media analysis, you've also completed step A of the double materiality assessment. While these two things don't make up 100% of step A, for example, because you also need to look at the internal experts within your company that have a say about how your company's contextualized within the bigger picture. So, and that falls out of the scope of these two things. Basically, once you've done these things all together, you can move on to step B, which is then the identification of the actual and potential IROs. So for stakeholder analysis, this means connecting your survey and interview answers to relevant sustainability matters. And for the media analysis, this means link findings to relevant sustainability matters. So it's really important to, once you have your data, to go through it carefully and see which answers fit best to which subtopics. And then based on those connections, determine whether you want to consider something to be material or non-material based on their answers. And of course, you as the sustainability expert within your company have the final word. If a stakeholder says something is super important, that doesn't automatically classify something as material. Because, for example, a nature-based NGO will always say that, for example, climate change is super relevant. But you also have a more nuanced view as an employee or as a sustainability expert. So this is up to also your discretion as a sustainability expert. And then finally, you have to map your material impacts based on severity and likelihood, and your financial risks and opportunities based on magnitude and likelihood, which is also then, once again, this step of connecting the various elements of the double materiality assessment. Conclusion on this part: it's important to make a pre-selection of sustainability topics, which you do with your ESRS subtopics and your entity-specific topics. Then when you engage stakeholders, you look at these specific topics. When you conduct your media analysis, you look at scientific research, news and peer reports. And for selecting material IROs, you look at the based on the above. You do the research based on the above, and you look at internal expertise. Thresholding IROs, we didn't discuss that in this webinar. Once again, feel free to reach out, but basically means adding quantitative and qualitative metrics, and especially for these metrics to establish whether they are in fact material or not. You use your stakeholder engagement and your media analysis as two major sources. And finally, you report on the process and the outcome, which is used for auditors as well as internal clarity. And with that, I give it back to my colleague Laurens.
Thank you, Jasper. So first of all, I saw some questions coming in. We're doing a QA after the solutions part, so we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So there are different solutions to tackle the DMA and the double materiality assessment, and in particular the stakeholder engagement and also the media analysis. So in the first, you can build an internal sustainability team within your company. And then you have two different solutions that can help you with executing the double materiality assessment. First of all, you can create an Excel file. In terms of the Excel file, you have to build your own model, and dig really into the CSRD regulation. What are the requirements? What do they need to know about our company? From my knowledge, it will take a lot of time. It's time consuming. It's really complex. You don't have a lot of help from the outside of the company. So that's a pro to use maybe software. What we did for you was we got the old regulation. We have all the things out of the regulation standing in our platform. We can really help you with setting you up for success, executing the double materiality assessments, so you can track your progress and build a really internal sustainability team within your company. You can work together with HR, for example, finance, and the sustainability team to really get things going on this part. The next solution is hiring an external consulting firm. Mostly this is based in this is put in an Excel file. What you really have with a consulting firm is it takes a lot of time, and it's also consuming a lot of time within the company from your own teams for interviewing your own colleagues. And the consulting firms really get to know your own company. What you really see is that the knowledge of the sustainability within your organization is going out of the organization after they're conducting the whole CSRD. So the knowledge is not staying in your organization. As you already know, sustainability is not something for the short term, it's something for the long term. So I think it's really good to have to create some feeling into the company about the knowledge of your sustainability in your organization. Next to that, you can hire an external freelancer. It's almost the same as a consulting firm. I think when you hire an external freelancer, you can create, and they want to create also an Excel file. I think it's also really time consuming as they are working on an hourly rate. You can also get the external freelancer work with a software tool such as Coolset, where we have everything filled in already for you as the questions, so you can work more viable for the money. At last, you can build an internal know-how with a software partner. In this case, you get your sustainability team, or you get a project group that's working on sustainability within your organization, and you get one database for collecting your data, and the know-how and the knowledge of sustainability within the organization stays in the organization. You have one database, so new colleagues or different colleagues can just put in and know about the sustainability within the organization. So let me guide you through something that Coolset is going to help you. This is our platform. This is our home base of the CSRD module. So we're setting you up for success with the overview. You can see you can work on your double materiality, on your general disclosures, and then you can work on your different ESRSs. First of all, you will have to execute the double materiality, and in particular the stakeholder engagement and the media analysis Jesper was talking about. And we will provide you with templates to execute the stakeholder engagement, to help you. What do we need to know from the stakeholders, and also some interview questions about your stakeholders. So we provide you with that, so give you a push in the right direction to get you going. Next to that, we also have the media analysis. For the media analysis, we will provide you with industry topics, with different media analysis from that industry you're in. So we get you going in the right direction, and give you a bit of how it works and where you need to find. So you can track your progress here. On the top right, you can see a learning hub. So we will provide you there with some more information about how you can execute the double materiality, and it's specific those two topics. So yeah, first of all, as Jesper was saying, before the DMA, during the DMA, you will decide if the topics, if the ESRSs are material for you. This is how it looks like, how you can decide if an ESRS is material for you. It's kind of a scoring base, so you have to decide if something is material or not material for you. On top right, you can see we have a guide, so it gives you some more information on how to use this kind of platform and this software. And we also have the source, so you can really see where it's coming from in the CSRD regulation, so that you can find it in the CSRD regulation yourself and get some more information about what they want from you. So this is a quick visual after you've done the double materiality assessment. In these metrics, you can see what ESRS is, what topics are material for your company, so what topics you will need to execute your report on, and also the stakeholder engagement and your media analysis. Lastly, these are the general disclosures. So as you can see on top right, on the right side of your screen, we'll set you up for more information and the source, where it's coming from in the CSRD. This is part where we can help you. So as Jesper was saying, step A is understanding the context. How can Coolset help you? How can our platform help you? Is first of all, I'll begin with stakeholder engagement. So you have to map out your stakeholders, and then you will need a database to store your data for analyzing the eventual output. We provide you with the surveys for employees, but also interview questions for suppliers. Then we provide you that you can connect your survey answers or interview answers to relevant sustainability matters. And after that, you have an automatic reporting and visualization of the stakeholder engagement. So that's the part of the stakeholder engagement. Next to that, we have the media analysis. We also have the database to store the media analysis, to store the data for also analyzing the same output for the report. Next to that, we provide you with a database so you can connect your media links to the relevant sustainability matters. So yeah, I think that's the part of the solutions that goes with this. You can download our double materiality guide. You can scan the QR code and you can find it on our website. Yeah, thank you very much. And I think it's on to the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence. Yeah, so some Q&A time. I see some questions in the comments. I also see 6 questions in the question bar. So I'll try to go through everything. So bear with me if you do have some extra minutes, and then I'll be sure to go over them. So I see a question from Isabel. Is there a format available to plot the outcomes of the stakeholder engagement, double materiality, or do you need to create it yourself? So at Coolset, we do help you create this format. We also have templates available that you can use for both the internal and external stakeholder engagement. So for surveys and interviews, and as Laurens just mentioned, we also have a platform where you can work on stakeholder engagement and connect the outcomes. So if you want to know more, please reach out to Lawrence or me, and we'll be happy to give you some more context on that. Then a question from Reuven. Are all data points to be reported on when a topic is relevant, or is it possible to say that certain data points, is it to say that certain data points / subtopics do not apply? Example, ESRS E4 biodiversity, subtopic pollution is maybe relevant, but soil sealing is not. It's a really good question. So basically, when you look at the double materiality assessment, you assess all the subtopics and the sub-subtopics. As soon as you determine that one of these subtopics or sub-subtopics is material, then the whole ESRS topic is material. And you need to report on it then under the ESRS, and you do need to report then on all of the ESRS topics. What I've also seen is that there's not a direct synergy between the double materiality assessment from the IFRAC and the ESRS. So while they do, of course, strongly correlate, the ESRS does go a bit more into the general elements of this of these topics. So it is really important that you do consider the topic as a whole. Then a question from Roland, also in the comments, what are the documentation requirements related to the pre-selection of subtopics? Also a great question. So the documentation requirements set by the IFRAC are actually quite, not very elaborate. So they do mention time and time again that it is up to the company, the reporting company, to decide how they report on the process. The most important thing is that they do report on the process and that the auditor can make sense of your documentation. So with that being said, there's no best practices out there yet on how to document these requirements. There are reports now being published, actually, the first ones with ESRS guidelines. But I would say, as much as I can tell you about this, is that just be as elaborate as possible. More information is always better than less information, and just work on best practices until they appear as a cross-sector standard. Then over to the question bar.
Yeah, so I can answer one from Bjorn. When will the CSRD tooling become available in the Coolset online platform? Very soon. We're ironing out some less regulations, and it will be very soon available. We will let you know as soon as possible. We will start with a double materiality assessment, and we will inform you real quick.
Yeah.
Real soon.
Then a question on are you required to include the answers from the stakeholder engagement if you don't agree with the answers? You don't need to, as I mentioned previously in the presentation, you don't need to include answers because at the end of the day, you as a sustainability expert working for the company have the final say over which opinions are reported on and which are not. It is important also that you have a clear methodology on how you include these opinions. So once again, if you have an opinion that's quite biased, if you could say, towards a certain opinion, and you think that this is not enough to consider something to be to make something material, that is up to your discretion. Another question: how do you make a short list without media analysis? Can you understand the materiality of a topic? So you make the short list based on these subtopics of the ESRS and the entity-specific topics that you determine to be material or to be relevant, at least for your company to go through. I think it's a really good question. So the second part of the question is, without media analysis, can you understand the materiality of a topic? I think that while the media analysis takes days, if not weeks, the shortlisting can be done, of course, also with use of the internet. So this doesn't mean that you really have to wait with the media analysis until you have a shortlist. I think this can be a symbiosis. So you can really work together with the media analysis and the shortlisting, and ensure that the shortlist is already somewhat based on not only your internal judgment, but also based on expert research, on news articles, on peer reports, and also realistically, if you do work in the sector and it's time to make a shortlist, you've already, of course, read dozens, if not hundreds, of reports relevant to your company. So you probably already have somewhat of a media analysis, going with you at all times, and that's only expanding as you work, as you go deeper into this topic. What about affected stakeholders? How to make shortlist? Yeah, so if I understand the question correctly, it's quite a short question. I think it's connected to the previous question because it's posed by the same person. So the stakeholder selection is done based on this shortlist. So you look at which are relevant for you and how you report on them, and it's up to your discretion. So what I said before, also you have to report on the way you do it, but doing it is actually up to the company itself, as long as you ensure that stakeholders are well connected to the relevant IROs that you want to report on. Then I see one more question. How many suppliers or employees do you need to ask or interview to base the assessment on? And is there a standard template or questionnaire for the stakeholder engagement? So to answer the first part of your question, there is no absolute standard. So there's also an FAQ document by the EFRAG in which they answer this question. And they say that no, there isn't a golden standard or a minimum requirement. You merely have to make sure that it is complete and that you can argue to your colleagues, but also to the auditor, why you've chosen this number of stakeholders. So yeah, I wouldn't put a number on it. Important is that you are clear about why you've chosen a certain number of stakeholders. Second part of your question, I'll repeat it again. Is there a standard template or questionnaire for this stakeholder engagement? Yes, there is. We have it at Coolset. We've developed several templates for both internal and external stakeholders. If you do decide to work with us on CSRD, we're going to help you every step of the way, including sending you these templates and giving advice on how to best send these out to relevant stakeholders. I think that was all the questions. Once again, if you do have more questions or you want to know more, please don't hesitate to reach out to Laurens or to me. You have our email address there, laurens@coolset.com and jasper@coolset.com. You also have the QR code for the DMA guide. And we'd like to thank you for joining us today, and hope you have a very nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.